Hi, everyone. Hope you had a good weekend and that you're having a good election day. If you haven't gone and voted yet today, I encourage you to do so. There are a lot of things on the ballot besides the presidential elections, congressional elections. There are kind of some local issues to vote for that sort of will affect your lives. So yeah, definitely go take time to vote. Um, take advantage of having asynchronous classes. So today, I just wanted to give you sort of a quick summary of the articles and videos and podcasts for you to watch and listen to. And so a lot of these resources I found are all sort of related to this question of suburbanization. Because what kind of ends up happening after the end of World War II is lots of men who fought in World War II get access to benefits called the benefits of the GI Bill. Basically, the GI Bill was a group of laws passed during and at the end of World War II that give a lot of benefits to veterans. And these benefits include having college educations mostly paid for, having access to federal housing authority loans, and then so people are able to both get an education and buy a home fairly cheaply due to the government subsidizing it. Now, when I say people, I want to really emphasize this. It is mostly white people because again the people running these programs are often racist or the programs themselves and the details about them have been written in ways that advantage white people. So many African Americans could not, for instance, get access to FHA loans, and so that made it a lot more difficult for African Americans to buy a home in the 1950s, and same also for university education. And so what this causes is both an increasing racial wealth gap in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, and then also a racial wealth gap that extends to the present, because white people were able to buy homes in the 1950s, 1960s, have those homes appreciated, and then pass down those houses that they bought to the next generation. And since housing is quite expensive, that leads to sort of a huge gap between the amount of wealth that white Americans have compared to African Americans, and compared to others as well. And so it's really in this period, right after World War II, going into the 1950s, early 1960s, where this sort of gap really arises. So, what I'm going to have you do for class today is watch two videos and listen to a podcast, as well as with the sort of regular reading you all are doing in the textbook, which I think links in a lot of these issues in very interesting ways. So one sort of beyond sort of housing discrimination, which is happening at the time, which that Twin Cities PBS video talks about, as specifically in the case of Minneapolis and St. Paul in Minnesota. Another aspect is that transportation is changing very rapidly in the 1950s. And more people are driving cars, and more importantly, the federal government is beginning to subsidize the building of highways around the country. And as that Vox video discusses, um, for a good reason. At the time, if you wanted to drive across the United States, it would have taken you around 60 days, something like that. Once the interstate highway system is built, you can cross the country in 48 hours. So it's pretty dramatic what the interstate highway system does. It does connect different regions of the country and allows you to drive a lot quicker. Now, and part of the reason why it's built and signed into law is because the president at the time, Dwight D. Eisenhower, former U.S. general who fought in World War II, once the interstate highway system built as a military measure. In the case of a war with the Soviet Union, you need a way to transport military material across the country rapidly. And so Eisenhower and others see this as, in fact, a military necessity. However, the creation of the interstate highway system has larger effects in terms of how and where people live, especially around cities. Because as that Fox video shows, highways are built through specific neighborhoods and through parts of the city, because the goal of these planners is to be able to get people from like rural areas and from suburbs directly into downtown. And so you have to build a highway straight through the city, right downtown. And that's why a lot of American cities look the way they do today. And where did those highways get built in those cities? Well, who has political power to resist having their entire neighborhood demolished for a highway? People with wealth, and people who already have political power within the system, right? And so white people and white neighborhoods organize to try to prevent highways from being built into these in destroying their neighborhoods. In places like Georgetown, Washington D.C., or Greenwich Village in New York City. There are a few other examples as well. But African Americans and African American communities often don't have that level of political power on the state and local level, even in the North. And so lots of African American communities and neighborhoods are destroyed. And they're destroyed under this almost like dystopian wording, essentially, where people say this neighborhood is slated for urban renewal, and urban renewal is destroy the neighborhood. Okay, so that's kind of like 1984-esque type language. But what this causes, again, is a sort of increasing of the racial wealth gap, and the combination of the way housing discrimination works in the 1930s through the 1950s, and where people can get housing loans and where they can't, and the building of the American highway system in the 1950s, leads to a sort of historical process that we call white flight, where white Americans start leaving the inner cities in the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s, and settling in predominantly white and exclusionary suburbs that have racial covenants that essentially ban African Americans and others from living in these primarily white neighborhoods. And so what you start to see is the emptying out of these pretty huge industrial cities into white flight suburbs. And so today, if you look at cities like Cleveland, Detroit, like Milwaukee, you see that, for instance, Cleveland, Detroit had almost like 2 times as many people back in the 1920s, 1930s than they do today. And it's because of that white flight to suburbs around those areas that were established as historically white exclusionary suburbs for the most part. And so the combination of sort of housing loans and the building of the interstate highway system really has reshaped the geography, the American political and racial and economic geography. And we're still kind of living with those consequences today. And in fact, it's only recently, really only over the past 20 years or so, where you start to see a discourse around gentrification. And what is this discourse? Gentrification is often, it's used as richer or often whiter people, or white people, moving back into the cities and quote unquote gentrifying neighborhoods, right? Changing the sort of racial makeup of a historical neighborhood, right? But gentrification is almost like a reversion of the actual historical processes of the 1950s, really up through the 1980s, of mass suburbanization and white flight of American cities. Um, and so, there are some sort of interesting changes today, as in fact, suburbs are becoming a lot more racially and economically diverse than they used to be, as are cities actually. And so this trend nowadays is actually reversing a little bit. Um, and that is leading to sort of a new political geography. But it's kind of important to note what was established in the 1950s from all of these different sort of historical processes with housing and the interstate highway system and racial covenants. That system lasted for like 50 years, all the way up into the early 2000s. And so it's really important to understand this is kind of how we have the geography of the country today. It's made around this time, in the 1950s. So suburbanization is a really important kind of process to understand that comes out of this post-war period. So I hope you would sort of enjoy the sort of different media that I've linked in the comment page here, and we will take some time to have a discussion on these questions on Thursday. So again, hope you have a good election day. As a reminder, get out and vote, and I will see you guys on Thursday. Thanks so much. Take care.